A tiny boy saved the life of a millionaire in an accident, then the millionaire. The roar of the sports car's engine echoed like the growl of a wild beast. Alexander's eyes were sharp and cold, mirroring the anger boiling within him. The sleek black sports car sped along the winding mountain road. The wind howled against the windows as if trying to stop him, but Alexander didn't care. "Why did everything turn out like this?" he muttered, punching the steering wheel hard. This morning's meeting had been a complete disaster. The skeptical glances from the shareholders and the piercing questions about the company's strategy kept replaying in his mind. The pressure was like an invisible shackle tightening around his neck. The car flew through a sharp turn, the tires screeching on the rain-slicked road. Alexander didn't notice that his speed had far exceeded safe limits. Above, dark clouds churned, signaling the imminent arrival of a massive storm. Ahead, a truck suddenly appeared, its headlights blinding him. "Damn it," he shouted, gripping the wheel tightly and trying to swerve to avoid a collision. But it was too late. Alexander's car skidded across the wet road, the tires losing traction. The piercing screech of rubber against asphalt reverberated through the otherwise silent mountain forest. The car flipped multiple times in mid-air before plunging down the steep ravine. The violent crash crumpled the vehicle, shards of metal scattering amid the old trees. Alexander lay unconscious, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. Rain began to fall, cold droplets splashing onto his pale face. Somewhere in the forest, the frantic flutter of birds taking flight broke the stillness, a harbinger of disaster. Not far away, in a small house nestled at the foot of the mountain, Elena, a middle-aged woman, was preparing dinner. A single mother, she lived with her son Lucas in this peaceful village. Elena was a strong woman but carried her share of sorrows. "Elena, did you hear that?" George, an elderly neighbor, knocked on her door and asked. "What's the matter, George?" Elena asked, surprised. "I just heard a loud noise from the mountain road. It could be an accident," George said, his voice filled with concern. Elena frowned slightly. "It's probably just someone dropping something. Who would be driving up there in this weather?" Still, a sense of unease stirred in Elena's heart. Meanwhile, Lucas was sitting alone on a large rock near the familiar edge of the forest. A small, frail boy with curly black hair and bright, intelligent eyes, Lucas had suffered from achondroplasia since birth, leaving his body weak and his stature much shorter than his peers. The loud noise from the mountain startled Lucas. What was that? He wondered aloud, clutching tightly the emergency whistle he always carried, a gift from his late grandmother. Without much thought, Lucas decided to venture into the forest to investigate. Despite the rain falling heavier by the minute, he kept walking, his small shoes quickly caked with mud. He didn't notice his clothes getting soaked, his focus entirely on the direction of the noise. After several minutes of trudging through leaves and mud, Lucas found the wrecked sports car amid a large bush. His heart pounded, and his legs trembled at the sight before him. "Oh my God," Lucas gasped, tears welling up in his eyes. He saw Alexander, his face pale and blood from the wound on his forehead staining the car seat. Lucas tried to pull Alexander out of the car, but he was too weak to make any progress. Dropping to his knees next to the car, Lucas pulled out his whistle and blew it hard. The shrill sound echoed through the forest, a desperate call for help. "Please don't die, mister. Someone will come. They'll help you," Lucas whispered through sobs, placing his small hands over Alexander's cold one. Time seemed to crawl. The rain fell harder, but Lucas stayed by Alexander's side, his expression full of worry and determination. The rain showed no sign of letting up. Meanwhile, Elena and George, having heard Lucas's whistle, decided to enter the forest to investigate. Elena brought a flashlight, while George carried an old raincoat. "Elena, hurry," George urged, his face anxious. They found Lucas sitting next to the wrecked car. "Lucas! What are you doing here?" Elena shouted, rushing toward him. "Mom, he's hurt. We have to save him." Lucas pointed to Alexander, his voice trembling. Elena and George exchanged worried glances and immediately sprang into action. George used all his strength to pull Alexander from the car while Elena shielded him from the pouring rain. "Call an ambulance, George," Elena yelled, trying to stay calm. "I'm on it," George replied, pulling out his phone to make the emergency call. Alexander was loaded onto a stretcher in critical condition. Lucas stood silently, clutching his mother's coat, tears streaming down his face. Elena placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did great, Lucas. He's going to be okay," Elena said, though she couldn't hide the worry in her voice. As the ambulance drove off, carrying Alexander and the secrets he held, it signaled the stormy challenges that lay ahead. The rain continued unabated, each drop forming small puddles on the damp ground. Despite Alexander being taken away for emergency care, the chaotic and anxious scene remained etched in the minds of the three who had been there. Lucas sat curled up on a chair near the fireplace at home, his eyes following his mother as she moved. Elena carefully prepared a cup of hot tea, trying to soothe his trembling. George had returned home after ensuring the ambulance had reached the right location. "Are you okay, Lucas?" Elena knelt down, placing a hand on her son's shoulder, her gaze filled with concern. Lucas nodded weakly, but his eyes still held a glimmer of unease. "Mom, is he going to be okay?" He wasn't moving at all. Elena gently stroked Lucas's hair, trying to comfort him. "He's at the hospital now. The doctors will do everything they can to help him. You were very brave, Lucas. If it weren't for you, they might not have found him in time." Lucas looked down at his small hands, remembering the moment he had been unable to pull Alexander from the car. A lingering sense of helplessness and fear gnawed at him. "But I couldn't do anything," Lucas whispered, his voice cracking. "You did the most important thing, Lucas," Elena replied firmly. "You blew the whistle. You called for help. Sometimes, doing your best is the most incredible thing you can do." In a stark hospital room, Alexander struggled to open his eyes. The world around him seemed blurry, the fluorescent lights making him squint. Pain coursed through his body, especially in his head and chest. When he tried to move, a sharp pang made him groan softly. A warm, deep voice spoke beside him. "You're awake. You're in the hospital. Try not to move too much." Alexander turned his head with difficulty and saw a man in a white coat checking a heart monitor. What happened?" Alexander's voice was hoarse. "You were in a pretty severe car accident," the doctor replied, glancing at the medical file. "Fortunately, a little boy found you and alerted the adults. Without him, your condition could have been much worse." Alexander closed his eyes, trying to remember, but the images in his mind were chaotic. The screeching sounds, the impact, and the darkness seemed to have etched themselves deeply into his memory. However, the mention of the boy piqued his curiosity. "That boy, who is he?" Alexander asked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "His name is Lucas. He lives in a nearby village. A very brave boy. He even tried to pull you out of the car before calling for help," the doctor explained. Alexander furrowed his brow but said nothing. The thought of being saved by a child made him feel uncomfortable. He had always been strong, proud, and self-reliant. The idea of depending on a child was hard to accept. 2 days later, Lucas and Elena visited the hospital to see Alexander. Though the rain hadn't fully stopped, Lucas had begged his mother to let him go. Elena agreed, partly because she knew Lucas wouldn't feel at ease until he saw the man whose life he had saved. They entered Alexander's hospital room. He was sitting up in bed, staring out the window with a cold expression. Lucas hesitantly stepped in first, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on the way. "Hello, sir." Lucas began softly. I'm Lucas. I'm glad you're awake. Alexander turned, his sharp gaze sweeping over the boy and then Elena. Thank you, he said curtly, his tone devoid of warmth. Lucas bit his lip, feeling awkward but still moved closer. I was really worried about you. Are you feeling better? Alexander nodded indifferently but didn't reply. Elena, standing behind Lucas, frowned at Alexander's cold attitude but chose to remain silent. I brought you flowers. Lucas placed the bouquet on the small table beside the hospital bed. I didn't know what kind you'd like, so I just picked the prettiest ones I could find. Alexander glanced at the flowers before turning away. Thanks. But you didn't have to bother. I don't need things like this. Lucas lowered his head, the brightness in his eyes dimming with sadness. Elena stepped forward, placing a hand on her son's shoulder and speaking firmly. Mr. Alexander, Lucas did everything he could to save you. If it weren't for my son, you wouldn't be sitting here now. The least you could do is show some gratitude. Alexander frowned, clearly uncomfortable with her directness. I didn't mean to be ungrateful, he said. I'm just not good at expressing it. Elena was about to say more, but Lucas tugged gently at her hand. It's okay, Mom. It's fine. After leaving the hospital, Elena and Lucas walked home in the light rain. Elena sighed, perplexed by Alexander's attitude. Lucas, you don't need to feel sad. Maybe he's just in pain and doesn't want to talk much. Lucas didn't reply, his eyes filled with thought. Mom. I don't think he really dislikes me. I saw his eyes. He's not what he seems, Mom. Elena smiled faintly. You might be right, Lucas. Sometimes, we just need to give people time. Lucas looked back toward the hospital where Alexander was staying. In his mind, the image of Alexander's eyes lingered, as though they held something deep and hidden that Alexander himself didn't want to reveal. The hospital room was still heavy with silence after Elena and Lucas left. Alexander stared at the wildflowers on the table beside his bed, his cold expression seemingly unchanging. Yet somewhere inside him, a strange feeling stirred. The small, uneven flowers contrasted starkly with everything in his life flashy, expensive, and meticulously perfect. He scoffed softly and turned away, but the image of Lucas and his bright, innocent eyes stayed with him. Damn it, he muttered, pulling the blanket over himself as if trying to hide something. Mary, a middle-aged nurse with neatly tied black hair and kind eyes, entered Alexander's room to check on him. She had worked at the hospital for many years and was known for her dedication. Mr. Alexander, how are you feeling? Mary asked while adjusting the 4-bag hanging on the stand. I'm fine, Alexander replied tersely, not bothering to look at her. Mary smiled slightly, unbothered by his attitude. Several people have called to check on you, but I assume you don't want to be disturbed right now. That's right, Alexander said dryly. I don't need anyone's pity. Mary frowned slightly, observing him for a long moment. Pity? I think some people are just concerned, like that boy Lucas. Hearing the name, Alexander grimaced. That boy. He's just a child, isn't he? Do you think I owe him? Mary paused, then looked Alexander directly in the eyes. You could think of it that way. But sometimes, a child can do things that adults are too afraid to do. That boy didn't leave you in the dangerous forest, even though he could have walked away to protect himself. Alexander was silent, his eyes darkening with discomfort. I don't need a lecture, he said coldly. Mary smiled, shrugged, and picked up her clipboard. I'm just saying what I see. Rest well, Mr. Alexander. And maybe try thinking about something other than yourself. She left the room, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts. At their small home, Lucas sat by the window, gazing at the distant mountains. The rain had stopped, but a cold breeze still slipped through the cracks, making him shiver slightly. Elena sat knitting in a chair nearby, occasionally glancing at her son. "Lucas, what are you thinking about?" Elena asked, setting her yarn down on her lap. Lucas turned to her, his eyes shining with determination. "Mom, I want to go back to the hospital to see Mr. Alexander." Elena sighed, placing the yarn in her lap. "Lucas, I don't think he wants to see anyone. You saw how he acted." "I don't care," Lucas interrupted, his voice trembling but resolute. "He might be cold, but I think he's lonely. If I don't visit, he'll just stay there all alone." Elena watched him for a long moment, then smiled gently. "You're so much like your grandmother. Your kindness sometimes worries me. But fine, if you really want to go, I'll take you." Lucas hugged his mother tightly, a bright smile lighting up his face. "Thank you, Mom." In a large boardroom at the company headquarters, Samuel sat in a luxurious leather chair, his sharp eyes scanning the shareholders around the table. On the table lay a fabricated report on Alexander's health. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alexander's condition after the accident is not looking good," Samuel began, his deep voice calm but laced with intent. "We need new leadership to stabilize the company during these challenging times." An older man sitting across from him, Mr. Michael, questioned skeptically, "Are you sure about this information? Alexander has always been a strong individual. I find it hard to believe he won't recover." Samuel smirked, feigning a sigh. "I don't want to believe it either, but it's the truth. Alexander's doctor has confirmed his condition. If we don't make decisions quickly, we could lose some major contracts." Murmurs spread throughout the boardroom. Samuel's smirk widened as he noticed the doubt in their eyes gradually dissipate. He knew he had gained the trust of most of the shareholders. At the hospital, Lucas and Elena walked through the long, stark white hallway. Lucas clutched a new bouquet of wildflowers, his small hands gripping tightly as if afraid to lose his courage. As they neared Alexander's room, they ran into Mary. "Lucas, you're here to see Mr. Alexander again?" Mary smiled, crouching slightly to meet his eyes. "Yes." Lucas replied, his eyes shining brightly. "He's still not happy. I want to tell him some funny stories to cheer him up." Mary chuckled, but a shadow of worry flickered in her eyes. "You're a kind boy, but be careful. Some people might not want Alexander to recover and get back on his feet too quickly." Elena frowned. "What do you mean by that, Mary?" Mary glanced around and lowered her voice. "I'm not entirely sure, but there's a man named Samuel who has visited a few times. I heard he's related to Alexander. Every time he comes, he asks about Alexander's condition with a tone that doesn't feel right." Lucas's eyes widened with concern. "We have to protect him." "Don't worry, Lucas," Mary reassured him, though unease lingered in her expression. "For now, go ahead and visit him. If anything seems strange, just let me know." Elena took Lucas's hand, and they entered Alexander's room. This time, Alexander was propped up against his pillows, watching them with an expression difficult to read. "Mr. Alexander." Lucas called out cheerfully, running to his bedside. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "You again?" Lucas smiled, holding up the bouquet. "I brought you more flowers. You need to get better soon, okay?" Alexander looked at the boy, feeling an inexplicable warmth rise in his otherwise cold and hollow heart, a warmth that unsettled him. That evening, the hospital hallways were silent, save for the occasional echo of nurses' footsteps and the dim light from overhead lamps. Samuel, dressed impeccably but with cold, calculating eyes, strolled toward Alexander's room. In his hand was a folder, and his lips curled into a sly smile. After knocking twice, he opened the door without waiting for an invitation. Alexander lay on his side, eyes half closed, his face still pale. "Samuel. What are you doing here?" Alexander opened his eyes, his voice raspy but still carrying an air of authority. "Hello, cousin," Samuel said, pulling a chair closer and sitting down with a friendly facade that failed to mask his insincerity. "I rushed over as soon as I heard about your accident. You know, everyone at the company is worried about you." Alexander scoffed. "Worried about me, or about my position?" Samuel shrugged, laughing lightly. "You're always so suspicious. But I understand. A serious accident like this must be stressful. Anyway, I'm here not only to check on you but also to bring some good news." Alexander frowned, attempting to sit up. "What good news?" Samuel placed the folder on the table. "I've been meeting with the shareholders on your behalf while you've been in the hospital. The company is stable, but there are some important decisions that need to be signed off on immediately. I've prepared everything you just need to sign." Alexander stared at the folder, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "What are you after, Samuel? I'm not dead yet." Samuel laughed loudly, trying to appear nonchalant. "Don't say that. Everything I'm doing is for the good of the company and you. You know I've always supported you." Alexander didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the folder before turning away. "I need time to review it. You can leave now." Samuel hesitated briefly but quickly recovered his composure. "Of course. Take your time. I'll come back later." One afternoon, when Lucas and Elena visited the hospital to bring lunch to Alexander, Lucas overheard Samuel's voice in the hallway. He was speaking on the phone, his tone low and sinister. "Alexander is no longer a problem. In just a few weeks, the company will be completely mine," Samuel said confidently, his voice cold. Lucas hid behind a door, clutching the lunchbox tightly, his eyes wide with fear. "What is he doing?" "Alexander is in danger." Elena called from down the hall, snapping Lucas out of his thoughts. "Lucas, where are you? Come on in." Lucas ran to his mother, but his mind was racing with Samuel's words. Inside Alexander's room, Lucas couldn't hide his anxiety. "Mr. Alexander, how are you feeling today?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Better," Alexander replied curtly, his gaze still as cold as ever. "And you? You look worried." Lucas hesitated but stopped himself from speaking. He knew that if he said anything without evidence, Alexander wouldn't believe him. "No, nothing. I'm just worried because it looks like it might rain again." Alexander didn't press further, simply watching the boy with a curious expression. After leaving the room, Lucas tugged at Elena's hand in the hallway, speaking urgently. "Mom, I need to talk to Nurse Mary right now. I heard something strange." Elena frowned but, seeing the seriousness in her son's eyes, nodded. "Okay, I'll call her." Mary arrived quickly, her kind face always a source of comfort for Lucas. "What's going on, Lucas? What do you want to tell me?" Lucas glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Nurse Mary, I heard Samuel say that Alexander won't be a problem anymore. He wants to take over Alexander's company." Mary's expression turned grave. "Are you sure? These are serious accusations." "I'm sure." "He said it on the phone," Lucas insisted, his voice firm. Mary was silent for a moment before turning to Elena. "Elena, this is serious. I'll keep a close eye on Samuel's actions. But we all need to be very careful. Someone like him won't hesitate to resort to dirty tricks." Elena nodded, her face full of worry as she looked at Lucas. "Lucas, you must promise me not to do anything dangerous, okay? Let Nurse Mary and me handle this." Lucas pursed his lips but eventually nodded. "Okay, Mom." Samuel wasn't a fool. He quickly realized Lucas had overheard his conversation. One afternoon, while Lucas was waiting for Elena in the hospital hallway, Samuel appeared from behind him. "Lucas," Samuel called, his voice low and menacing, making the boy flinch. Lucas turned around, his eyes wide. You called me. Samuel leaned down, a cold smile spreading across his face. You shouldn't meddle in adult affairs, understand? Whatever you heard the other day, you'd best forget it. Lucas felt his heart pounding, his hands trembling as he tried to stay calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Samuel raised an eyebrow, his smile growing more sinister. Listen, kid, I don't like repeating myself. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I can't guarantee what might happen to you or your mother. Lucas's face went pale, fear engulfing him. But deep inside, his grandmother's words echoed in his mind. Bravery isn't about not being scared, it's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. When Elena returned, Lucas said nothing to his mother, but his resolve was set. I have to protect Mr. Alexander. Samuel cannot win. Lucas remembered the old phone he had hidden under his pillow. A plan began to form in his mind. He knew he was just a small child, but courage didn't come from size, it came from determination. Samuel's icy gaze and threats had planted fear, but they couldn't extinguish the fire of bravery burning in Lucas's heart. Things were becoming more dangerous, and Lucas knew this was only the beginning. Sitting in his small room, Lucas's hands shook as he held the battered old phone. Its screen was scratched, and some of the buttons barely worked, but it was the only tool he had. The thought of Samuel kept him awake. That man had not only threatened him but also planned to steal everything that belonged to Mr. Alexander. I can't stay silent, Lucas whispered to himself, his eyes burning with determination. The wind howled through the window, but his small room remained eerily quiet. In the adjacent room, Elena was unaware of what her son was secretly preparing. Lucas thought of Alexander's eyes, cold and distant, yet hiding a loneliness that was hard to describe. He knew that if he did nothing, Alexander would lose everything. Carefully tucking the phone under his pillow, Lucas decided, tomorrow, he would return to the hospital and find a way to keep an eye on Samuel. The next morning, Elena and Lucas visited the hospital under the pretense of bringing breakfast to Alexander. Mary was on the morning shift and smiled warmly when she saw Lucas. Visiting Mr. Alexander again? You're such a thoughtful boy, Mary said, patting his head. Lucas nodded, glancing toward the end of the hallway. Miss Mary, is Mr. Samuel still here? Mary paused, her expression momentarily serious, before lowering her voice. I saw him this morning, but he left a little while ago. Lucas, are you worried about something? Lucas hesitated, but before he could respond, Elena approached and took his hand. Lucas, you shouldn't ask about adult matters like that. Lucas bit his lip but knew he needed to speak with Alexander. In the hospital room, Alexander sat propped up against the bed, his face pale and tired, but his gaze as sharp as ever. Lucas entered, carrying the food his mother had prepared. Good morning, sir. I brought you breakfast, Lucas said softly, trying to hide his nervousness. Alexander studied the boy, his eyes scrutinizing. You again? Why do you come here every day? Lucas set the food on the table and looked up at Alexander, his expression serious. I come because I'm worried about you. I heard people saying bad things about you. Alexander frowned. Who said what? Lucas pressed his lips together, hesitating. Mr. Samuel. I overheard him talking about taking over your company. He said you wouldn't be able to come back. Alexander straightened abruptly, pain shooting through his body, but he ignored it. What did you say? Samuel. Lucas nodded earnestly. I heard him talking on the phone. I didn't know if I should tell you, but I don't want you to get hurt. Alexander was silent for a long moment. He looked at the small boy standing before him, his eyes bright yet filled with worry. A strange feeling stirred in Alexander, a sense of being trusted, of being cared for. Thank you, Lucas, Alexander said, his voice lowering. But this is a complicated matter. You shouldn't worry too much. Lucas shook his head. But you have to be careful. I don't think Mr. Samuel is a good person. Mary, who had overheard part of the conversation from outside, stepped into the room, her expression serious. Mr. Alexander, I believe Lucas isn't lying, Mary said, looking directly at him. I've also found Samuel's behavior suspicious. He's been coming here often and seems overly interested in your condition. Alexander sighed, glancing at Mary. I see. Perhaps I've been too complacent. But I need evidence to confront Samuel. Without it, he won't back down. Mary nodded. I'll keep an eye on him and report back if I notice anything unusual. Lucas's eyes brightened at her words. He knew he had found an ally. That afternoon, as Lucas and Elena prepared to leave the hospital, Samuel appeared at the end of the hallway. Spotting Lucas, he walked toward him. Elena had already stepped outside, unaware that Samuel was approaching her son. Lucas, Samuel called, his voice low and threatening. Lucas turned, his face pale as Samuel stared at him. You still haven't learned to stay quiet, have you? Samuel crouched down, his face only inches from Lucas's. I warned you already. If you open your mouth again, your mother won't be safe. Lucas swallowed hard, his hands clutching the hem of his shirt. He was terrified, but his gaze remained steady as he looked Samuel in the eye. I'm not afraid of you. You won't win. Samuel smirked coldly. Stubborn little boy. Remember what I said. On the way home, Lucas stayed silent, but his resolve burned stronger than ever. Samuel's threats didn't frighten him, they only made him more determined. That night, after Elena had gone to bed, Lucas retrieved the old phone from under his pillow. I'll record the evidence, he whispered. Mr. Samuel won't hurt Mr. Alexander if I have proof. The faint light from his bedside lamp illuminated his small but resolute face. He knew what he was about to do was dangerous, but only one thought filled his mind: I must protect Mr. Alexander and expose the villain. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. Samuel's menacing face haunted him, his words echoing in his ears. Lying on his bed, Lucas stared at the battered phone beside his pillow. He knew what he had to do, but even bravery couldn't completely mask his fear. Bravery isn't about not being scared, Lucas repeated his grandmother's words in his mind. It's about doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Taking a deep breath, Lucas grabbed his phone and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He decided he would return to the hospital the next day to put his plan into action. At the hospital, Samuel stood in a shadowy corner of the hallway, his eyes fixed on the door to Alexander's room. He was speaking on the phone, his voice steady but chilling. Make sure there are no mistakes. If Alexander gets suspicious, our entire plan will collapse. A voice on the other end replied, Don't worry, I've handled all the paperwork. Once he signs, the company will be ours. Samuel hung up and smirked. Striding toward Alexander's room, he didn't notice the small figure hiding behind a door at the end of the hallway. Lucas's bright eyes gleamed with determination. In the hospital room, Alexander was struggling to sit up, his eyes gazing out the window. The dull aches across his body persisted, but his mind was preoccupied with Samuel and the shady actions Lucas had mentioned. Samuel entered, his face feigning concern, but his eyes remained cold. Alexander, I've brought more documents the company needs. Things can't be delayed any longer. Alexander glanced at Samuel, his sharp gaze unwavering. I told you already, I need time. Do you think I don't know what's going on? Samuel flinched but quickly regained his composure. Cousin, I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm only trying to help you during this difficult time. Alexander scoffed. Help me? Or help yourself? Samuel frowned, but before he could respond, the door to the room opened. Lucas stepped inside, holding a small bouquet of flowers. I'm sorry for interrupting, Lucas said, glancing nervously at Samuel. I just wanted to visit Mr. Alexander for a bit. Samuel glared at Lucas, his irritation evident, but said nothing. Come in, Alexander said, his tone softening. You're not interrupting. Lucas placed the flowers on the table, trying to steady his nerves. He glanced at Samuel, an idea forming in his mind. Can I stay and talk to you for a while? Lucas asked, his eyes sincere as they met Alexander's. Alexander nodded. Of course. Samuel stood, glaring at Lucas. I think I'll leave now. But remember what I said, Alexander. The company needs you, and everything I'm doing is for your benefit. Alexander didn't respond, watching Samuel leave the room. As Samuel exited, he turned back to see Lucas standing in the hallway. Narrowing his eyes, he walked over quickly and crouched down to Lucas's level. Kid, Samuel said, his voice low and menacing. What did I tell you? Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong. You're playing a very dangerous game. Lucas stepped back, his hands clutching the pocket that held his phone. I didn't do anything wrong. I just want to help Mr. Alexander. Samuel smirked coldly. Help? And who do you think you are? A weak little kid like you can't do anything. But if you keep this up, your mother won't stay safe. Understand? Lucas's heart pounded, fear coursing through him, but he didn't waver. You can't hurt my mom. I'll protect her and Mr. Alexander. Samuel chuckled. Brave words, kid. But remember this, I won't hesitate to teach you a lesson. After Lucas returned to Alexander's room, Alexander noticed the unease in the boy's expression. Lucas, what's wrong? Are you scared of something? Lucas bit his lip, his eyes glistening with tears. Mr. Alexander. I'm scared of Mr. Samuel. He threatened me and my mom. I don't know what to do. Alexander sat up straight, anger flaring in his chest. What did he say to you? Lucas recounted everything, from what he had overheard to Samuel's threats. Alexander clenched his fists, his eyes blazing with fury. I trusted him too much, Alexander muttered, his jaw tightening. He thinks I'll let this slide. That night, after Lucas and Elena returned home, the boy remained troubled by the events. Elena noticed her son's anxiety and asked, Lucas, is something wrong? You seem tense. Lucas shook his head. It's nothing, Mom. When Elena went to bed, Lucas pulled out his phone, testing its video recording function. Though the screen was blurry and the camera old, he believed this was the only way to expose Samuel. He whispered to himself, I'll find a way to record evidence. No one is going to hurt Mr. Alexander. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated his small but determined face. Morning sunlight poured through the hospital window, lighting Alexander's sharp features. After a restless night consumed by thoughts of Samuel, Alexander decided he couldn't delay any longer. Picking up his phone, he called his personal lawyer. James, I need you to investigate the documents Samuel brought over immediately. There's something suspicious about them, Alexander said firmly. On the other end, James nodded. Understood, sir. I'll get on it right away. In the meantime, be careful. Samuel isn't someone to be taken lightly. Meanwhile, in a secluded corner of the hospital hallway, Lucas discreetly observed Samuel from a distance. The old phone in his hand was set to record, ready to capture any incriminating words or actions. Samuel entered Alexander's room, his face a mask of concern. Alexander, I've brought some documents that need to be signed right away. Time isn't on our side. Alexander raised an eyebrow, his sharp eyes fixed on Samuel. You think I'll sign without reviewing them? You're mistaken. Samuel tried to remain calm, but the tension in his expression didn't escape Lucas's notice. From his hiding spot, the boy lifted his phone, carefully recording everything. I don't understand why you're so suspicious of me, Samuel said, feigning innocence. Everything I've done has been for the good of the company and for you. Alexander scoffed. For my good, or for yours? Samuel, I'm not naive enough to fall for your sweet talk. If you truly want to help, let me make my own decisions. Lucas heard every word, sensing Alexander's growing anger. He knew the time to act was now. As Samuel left the room, Lucas followed him from a safe distance, determined to gather the evidence Alexander needed. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the rooftop. Lucas bit his lip, deciding to take a daring risk and follow him closely. When they reached the rooftop, Samuel began a phone call. Listen carefully, Samuel said coldly. Alexander is not as easy to control as I thought. We need to accelerate the plan before he regains full authority. Lucas held his breath, his hands trembling as he recorded everything on his old phone. The financial records have already been altered. Once he signs, the company will be entirely mine. He has no way out of this trap, Samuel continued, a sinister smile spreading across his face. Lucas knew he couldn't stay any longer. As Samuel turned his head, Lucas quickly slipped behind the door leading to the stairwell. He bolted down the stairs, his heart racing, and ran back to find his mother and Mary, panting heavily. At the hospital, Alexander received a call from James. Mr. Alexander, I've reviewed the documents briefly. There are some irregularities, and a few signatures appear to have been forged. I'll need more time to confirm, but everything is starting to align. Alexander nodded, his eyes cold. Do it as quickly as possible, James. I won't let Samuel continue his charade. When Lucas and Elena entered the room, the boy quickly handed Alexander the old phone. Mr. Alexander, I recorded it. I think everything you need is on here. Alexander looked at Lucas, his sharp gaze softening for a moment. He took the phone and played the video. The images and audio were blurry, but Samuel's words were unmistakable. He said the company would belong to him, Lucas whispered, his eyes filled with worry. You have to be careful. Alexander closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Lucas, you did very well. But now, leave the rest to me. I'll handle it. Mary entered the room, holding a stack of documents. Mr. Alexander, I think you need to see this. I've just learned that Samuel contacted your private doctor, asking him to falsify reports about your health. Alexander flipped through the documents, his eyes blazing with anger. He thinks he's clever. But this time, he's met the wrong opponent. He looked at Mary and Lucas, his voice firm. We're going to expose him. And I need both of your help. The next morning, Alexander summoned James and Mary to the hospital. In the room, he reviewed the video Lucas had recorded, Samuel's words echoing like a harsh slap against the trust Alexander had once placed in him. James, you need to act quickly. Verify all the documents and bring this video to court if necessary, Alexander commanded, his tone cold and authoritative. Understood, sir. I'll get started right away, James replied, his eyes sharp. Mary held the stack of documents Samuel had left behind. I can contact some people at the hospital to verify this. We'll need more evidence to expose him before the board. Alexander nodded, his gaze resting on Lucas, who sat quietly in a chair, his eyes anxious yet determined. Lucas, you've helped me immensely. But from now on, let the adults handle this. You and your mother must stay safe. Lucas wanted to protest, but when he saw Alexander's stern expression, he simply nodded. At the company headquarters, Samuel continued to advance his scheme. He called for an emergency meeting with the board of directors, bringing along falsified documents to convince them that Alexander was no longer fit to lead. Ladies and gentlemen, Samuel began, his voice full of confidence. Mr. Alexander's health is in critical condition. The company cannot afford to wait for his recovery. I propose that the board approve my appointment as interim CEO. Some board members nodded in agreement, but Mr. Michael, who had worked with Alexander for years, frowned in skepticism. "Samuel, are you certain this is the best course of action? Alexander has led this company to success. We can't replace him so easily." Samuel smiled, his expression oozing false sincerity. "Mr. Michael, I understand your concerns. But this is the best solution to safeguard the company's interests." At that moment, the doors to the boardroom swung open. Alexander, still pale but standing tall with the support of James and Mary, entered the room. His cold gaze swept across the faces in the room. "Are you trying to replace me, Samuel?" Alexander's voice rang out, each word a sharp blow to the tense atmosphere. The room fell silent. Samuel froze, but quickly composed himself. "Alexander, I didn't expect you to attend this meeting. I was merely trying to help the company while you're unable to work." Alexander smirked. "Help me? Or help yourself? James, show them the evidence." James stepped forward and played the video Lucas had recorded on the large screen. Samuel's words echoed clearly, leaving the board members stunned. Michael and several others shook their heads in anger. "This is outrageous!" Michael shouted. "Samuel, were you planning to seize control of the company like this?" Samuel backed away, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is a misunderstanding. The video could be doctored." Alexander cut him off, his voice icy. "It's not just the video. James, present the forged documents he prepared." James laid out the documents, pointing out the discrepancies and forged signatures. The board erupted in murmurs, their trust in Samuel completely shattered. "Mr. Samuel," Mary said, her tone sharp. "You didn't just betray Alexander's trust, you jeopardized the entire company. Did you really think you could get away with this?" Samuel had no way out. He tried to argue, but Alexander stepped forward, his eyes like daggers. "You made a mistake thinking I would fall. As of today, you have no place here." Turning to the board, Alexander declared, "I propose that we strip Samuel of all authority and initiate a full investigation. He doesn't deserve to remain in this company." The board unanimously agreed. Samuel was escorted out of the room, the disdainful gazes of the board members following him. That evening, Lucas sat by the window, his eyes shining with joy. Alexander was safe, and Samuel's schemes had been exposed. Elena smiled, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. "You did so well, Lucas. Mr. Alexander will never forget this." Lucas smiled, his heart feeling light. He knew that, no matter how small he was, courage and determination could change the course of a story. Alexander stood silently in the boardroom after Samuel was taken away, his sharp gaze softening. The tension in the room gave way to a renewed sense of unity as the board exchanged glances of trust toward Alexander. Mr. Michael approached, placing a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "Alexander, you did an excellent job. We're sorry for doubting you during this time," Michael said warmly. Alexander nodded slightly, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "I understand, Michael. We need to rebuild trust and protect this company. I won't let something like this happen again." As everyone gradually left, Alexander took a deep breath, feeling the immense weight that had just been lifted from his shoulders. But one name kept echoing in his mind, Lucas. That evening, as the warm lights illuminated the small village, Alexander, still aching but determined, decided to visit Lucas and Elena. He couldn't wait any longer to express his gratitude to the boy who had saved his life and helped him expose Samuel. When Alexander knocked on Elena's door, she opened it with a look of surprise. "Mr. Alexander? Why are you here? You're not fully recovered yet." Alexander gave a soft smile. "I'm feeling much better. I wanted to see Lucas. I owe that boy a thank you." Elena stepped aside, inviting him in. Inside the cozy little home, Lucas was sitting on the floor, absorbed in arranging his plastic toy cars. Hearing footsteps, he looked up, his eyes lighting up when he saw Alexander. "Mr. Alexander!" Lucas exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "You really came?" Alexander nodded and crouched slightly to meet Lucas at eye level. "Yes, I came to thank you, Lucas. You didn't just save my life, you also helped me keep my company. You're a very brave boy." Lucas blushed, shyly looking down at his small feet. "I just did what I thought was right, sir. I didn't want Samuel to hurt you." Alexander placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, his gaze warm and kind. "You did more than just the right thing, Lucas. You showed me that courage doesn't come from age or strength, it comes from the heart." Elena stood nearby, smiling with pride. But Alexander wasn't finished. He turned to her, his voice sincere. "Mrs. Elena, I owe you and Lucas so much. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. But words aren't enough to express my gratitude. I want to do something to give back." The next morning, Alexander returned to the village with a sleek black SUV. When Lucas saw the car from afar, he couldn't hide his curiosity and excitement. Alexander stepped out, carrying a large, carefully wrapped box in his arms. "Mr. Alexander, what's this?" Lucas asked, his wide eyes filled with anticipation. Alexander smiled, placing the box in front of him. "Open it, Lucas. It's a small gift I wanted to give you." Lucas carefully unwrapped the paper, and when he opened the box, he nearly shouted in delight. Inside was a set of intricately detailed model cars, the kind Lucas had always dreamed of but never thought he'd own. "Wow, this is amazing!" Lucas exclaimed, throwing his arms around Alexander. His face beamed with joy. "Thank you, sir. I've never seen models this beautiful before." Alexander chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "You deserve it, Lucas. But I'm still not done repaying you." Alexander turned to Elena, who was watching with astonishment. "Mrs. Elena, I know how much you've struggled to raise Lucas. I'd like to help you both by repairing your home and providing some new furnishings. It's the least I can do to show my gratitude." Elena shook her head, a trace of worry in her eyes. "Mr. Alexander, I can't accept such a generous gift. Just knowing you and Lucas are healthy is enough for me." Alexander responded gently, "Elena, please don't refuse. This isn't just about gratitude, it's my way of repaying the kindness you and Lucas showed me. Without Lucas, I wouldn't be standing here today." After much persuasion, Elena finally agreed. In the following days, the small house was renovated with a new roof, freshly painted walls, and a small garden filled with flowers. Lucas couldn't contain his excitement, and Elena quietly thanked Alexander for his help. A few weeks later, when Alexander had fully recovered, he invited Lucas and Elena to a company gathering. In the large boardroom, in front of shareholders and employees, Alexander publicly expressed his gratitude to Lucas. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice filled with pride. "Today, I want to introduce someone very special. This is Lucas, the boy who saved my life and helped me protect this company. Without him, we might not be here today." Lucas stood beside Alexander, feeling both nervous and proud. Applause erupted throughout the room, and though his face turned red, Lucas couldn't stop smiling. Alexander leaned down and whispered into Lucas's ear, "You're my hero, Lucas. And I'll always be here for you whenever you need me." From that day on, the relationship between Alexander, Lucas, and Elena grew beyond gratitude. They became an unofficial family, with Alexander frequently visiting and supporting Lucas in his studies and dreams. Lucas, the small boy with a big heart, didn't just change Alexander's life, he reminded him that kindness and sincerity could come from the most unexpected places. The lesson from this story is the power of courage and kindness. Despite being just a small boy, Lucas's actions changed the course of Alexander's life. Lucas not only saved Alexander but also helped expose Samuel's scheme, protecting the company in Alexander's reputation. His integrity and determination reminded Alexander of the true values in life: gratitude, unity, and responsibility toward others. The key takeaway is to always do what's right, even in the face of challenges.